You're standing in the forum, heart hammering against your ribs. The crowd presses in from every side, a wall of faces twisted with anticipation. Sweat rolls down your spine despite the morning chill. You can smell it now, acrid and sharp, the scent of fear mingling with incense from the nearby temple. The executioner's hand is already on your shoulder, fingers digging into the hollow above your collarbone. You try to swallow, but your throat has gone dry as sand. This is Rome. This is the first century of the Common Era, and you're about to discover that death here is not simply death. It's theater, it's warning, it's art form and state policy wrapped into one. Because the Romans didn't just kill you, they erased you, they transformed you. They turned your final moments into a message that would echo for generations. Today you're going to understand 12 methods the Roman state used to execute its condemned, and by the end, you'll realize the most horrifying truth isn't the brutality itself. It's the precision, the calculation, the way each method was chosen not for efficiency, but for meaning. If this is gripping you, hit like and subscribe, because the next part gets worse. But before you can understand why these executions were so uniquely terrible, you need to understand what execution meant in Rome. This wasn't about justice as we conceive it. The Latin word for execution, Supplicium, shared its root with the word for prayer, for supplication to the gods. Think about that. To execute someone wasn't merely to remove a criminal from society. It was to restore cosmic balance, to cleanse pollution, to demonstrate to both mortals and immortals that Rome remained pure, disciplined, a city favored by divine forces. Every method, every ritual, every deliberate choice of suffering served this larger machinery of power. Now watch what happens when religion, law, and theater collide. The first method sits at the foundation of Roman identity itself: crucifixion. You've heard the word so many times it might have lost its edge, but strip away 2,000 years of cultural distance and look at what it actually was. You're stripped naked in public. Already the humiliation cuts deeper than any blade because, in Roman society, to be seen unclothed is to lose personhood, to become an object. They nail you, not through the palms as later art would suggest, but through the wrists where the bone structure can support your weight. Then the feet, nailed sideways through the heel. The cross isn't lifted smoothly. It's dropped into the socket hole with a jarring crunch that dislocates shoulders and sends white fire through every nerve. And then comes the waiting. Here's the thing about crucifixion. You don't die from blood loss. You die from asphyxiation. Your body weight pulls you down, compressing your lungs. To breathe, you must push up on the nails through your feet, scraping your lacerated back against the rough wood. Every breath is a choice. Every breath is agony. And you make that choice over and over, for hours, sometimes days, until finally your muscles give out and you can't push anymore. The Romans placed crosses along major roads, the Via Appia, the Via Latina. Travelers would pass crucified bodies for miles, some still living, some bloating in the sun, some reduced to picked-over skeletons because the law forbade anyone from taking them down. 6,000 followers of Spartacus lined a single road. 6,000 crosses, 6,000 reminders that rebellion ends here, gasping for air you can no longer claim. Now the next method takes us inside, away from public roads, into the Tullianum. That's the ancient name for Rome's only state prison, a cramped stone chamber beneath the Forum. Most prisoners never stayed there long because Rome didn't believe in incarceration as punishment. Prison was a waiting room, and for certain enemies of the state, high-profile captives, generals who'd lost too decisively to Rome's legions, the waiting ended in strangulation, not the quick snap of a hanging. Manual strangulation, performed by an executioner using a garrote or simply his hands, while senators watched. Vercingetorix, the Gallic chieftain who united the tribes against Julius Caesar, spent 6 years in that dark hole before they strangled him during Caesar's triumph. 6 years of waiting, 6 years of knowing. The psychological warfare of it was the point. You weren't just killed. You were aged, broken, reduced, and then killed as the forgotten afterthought to someone else's celebration. But that's when you realize something darker. The Romans had rules about who could be strangled and who required something worse. Decapitation, the third method, seems almost merciful by comparison. One clean stroke. Except it wasn't mercy. It was status. Roman citizens, when condemned to death, received the privilege of beheading. A single blow from an executioner's sword, ideally severing the head completely. The key word there is ideally. Executioners were human, swords dulled, necks are surprisingly thick with muscle and bone. Records suggest that multiple blows were common, that the condemned would feel the first strike, the second, panic rising as their body refused to separate cleanly. Still, this was considered dignified, quick, the sort of death a Roman could face with composure, which tells you everything about what they reserved for non-citizens. And that's when the fourth method enters the picture. Crucifixion's cousin, but worse, impalement. You're taken outside the city walls where the law says certain executions must occur to avoid spiritual contamination. They sharpen a wooden stake, thick as a man's forearm, and force it through your body vertically. The spike enters through the lower torso, carefully avoiding major organs because the goal isn't immediate death. The goal is display. You're hoisted upright. The stake's weight supported by a base, and there you remain, sometimes for days, as gravity slowly pulls you down the shaft. The Romans used this primarily for military deserters and rebels from provinces that had sworn loyalty, then broken it. The message was clear. You don't just betray Rome and die, you're transformed into a landmark, a vertical monument to the cost of treachery. Think about the logic here. Every method is calibrated. Beheading for citizens because they retain personhood even in death. Crucifixion and impalement for those who've rejected or never possessed Roman identity. Strangulation for captive leaders because the state wants their death contained, witnessed, controlled. Nothing is random. Nothing is merely cruel. It's all language. Now watch what happens when you add humiliation to pain. The fifth method takes the spectacle public in a different way. The Fustuarium. Reserved almost exclusively for Roman soldiers who'd shown cowardice, this wasn't execution by the state's hand. It was execution by your own unit. The condemned soldier is stripped and beaten to death by his fellow legionaries using clubs and stones, not quickly. The blows rain down from all sides, a chaos of impacts, but the unspoken rule is that no single blow should be fatal. That would rob the community of its purgative function. The beating continues until the soldier's body is pulp, and then it's dragged outside the camp's boundaries and left unburied. No funeral rites, no grave. In Roman belief, that meant no afterlife. The soul, denied proper burial, would wander eternally, neither living nor properly dead. The soldier's erasure was complete, from the living world, from the world of the dead, from memory itself. And then it gets worse. The sixth method brings us to fire. Not burning at the stake as later European centuries would practice it, but something more calculated. Tunica molesta, the flaming tunic. You're dressed in a shirt soaked in pitch, oil and sulfur. Then they light it. The garment adheres to your skin as it ignites, ensuring the fire can't be removed, can't be escaped. The Emperor Nero, according to the historian Tacitus, used this method against Christians he blamed for the Great Fire of 64 in the Common Era. He turned them into human torches in his garden, lighting his evening parties with their burning bodies. The detail that should chill you isn't the sadism, it's the metaphor. These people were accused of fire, so they became fire. Their execution performed the crime as punishment, a closed loop of symbolic justice that made perfect sense to Roman sensibility. But here's the thing about Roman fire executions. They served a dual purpose. Yes, they punished, but they also purified. Fire in Roman religious thought was the ultimate cleanser. It consumed pollution, reduced corruption to ash. So when you burned someone alive, you weren't just killing them, you were transforming them from corrupt matter into clean smoke. The gods could accept that offering. The city could exhale. Now the seventh method forces us to confront something even Romans debated as excessive. Damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. You're taken to the arena, the Colosseum, or one of the regional amphitheaters that dotted the empire. No armor, no weapons in most cases. Sometimes you're bound to a post. The gates open and lions, bears, leopards, bulls, wild dogs, any predator the state has captured and starved, are released. What happens next isn't combat, it's feeding time. The animals don't kill cleanly, they tear, they maul. Big cats go for the throat when hunting prey, but you're not prey behaving correctly. You're screaming, thrashing, bleeding in ways that trigger feeding frenzy. Multiple animals might attack simultaneously. The crowd roars. Bets are placed on how long you'll last, which animal will land the killing blow, whether you'll die from blood loss or shock first. The Romans used this method primarily for three categories of condemned: violent criminals, captured rebels from recent wars, and Christians refusing to sacrifice to Roman gods. That third category is important because it reveals the execution's deeper logic. If you rejected the gods, you were returned to nature, stripped of civilization, fed to creatures that operated purely on instinct. You were removed from the human category entirely, made animal yourself in your final moments. The amphitheater performances often staged these executions as mythological recreations. You weren't just killed by a bear. You were Orpheus torn apart by wild creatures, or Prometheus having your liver eaten, except you didn't come back the next day. The myth played out once final, and your death became legend's dark echo. And that's when you understand the pattern. These aren't 12 random methods. They're a taxonomy, a carefully constructed hierarchy of how to die, each method corresponding to your crime's perceived severity and your status in Rome's intricate social architecture. The eighth method takes us back to something ancient, something that predated even Rome itself. The sack, poena culli. You've been convicted of parricide, the murder of a close family member, a crime Romans considered more polluting than any other because it violated the foundational unit of society. You're stripped and sewn into a leather sack along with a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. Then the sack is thrown into the Tiber River. The animals, terrified and confined, attack anything they contact in the darkness. You're clawed, bitten, pecked, constricted, all while drowning. The symbolism was precise. The dog represented shamelessness. The rooster, typically sacrificed to household gods, represented piety violated. The viper was obvious, poison and evil. The monkey represented the perversion of human form, a creature almost human but bestial. You died surrounded by manifestations of your own corrupted nature, and your body, contained in the sack, never polluted the city's sacred soil. The river carried you away, purifying Rome of your presence. Historical records suggest this method fell out of regular use by the middle of the 1st century before the Common Era, but the law remained on the books, a reminder that certain violations sat beyond ordinary punishment. Now the 9th method introduces us to death by exposure, but not as you might imagine it. You're condemned to the quarries or the mines. This is damnatio ad metallo, technically not execution because you're sentenced to labor, not death, but the distinction is semantic. You're chained in underground tunnels, working by lamplight that barely penetrates the dust and darkness. No sunlight, minimal food, water rationed. You swing a pick until your hands bleed, then you swing it more. The air is thick with stone dust that coats your lungs, fills your throat. Most condemned to the mines died within a year. Some lasted 2, 3, if they were extraordinarily strong. But they all died eventually, ground down by the mountain itself. The state could claim clean hands. We didn't execute them, they'd say. We simply put them to productive use. That they couldn't survive productivity was their own constitutional failure. The calculation here should horrify you. Rome got valuable materials, marble, lead, gold, silver, extracted by labor that cost nothing except the condemned's lives. Profit and punishment merged seamlessly, and because mine slaves worked far from population centers, out of sight in the empire's remote corners, their suffering left no inconvenient witnesses. The 10th method brings us to drowning, but formalized, ritualized beyond simple killing. You're taken to a bridge over the Tiber, or if you're in a coastal city, to the harbor. Weights are attached to your ankles. Sometimes you're tied in a specific posture, knees to chest, mirroring the fetal position or the burial posture of Rome's most ancient dead. Then you're dropped. The Tiber in Rome was sacred, flowing past temples and through the heart of civic life. To drown someone there was to feed the river a criminal's pollution, trusting the current to carry it away out to the sea, dispersing it into the vastness where gods of salt water could neutralize what gods of the city couldn't process. Drowning left no body to bury incorrectly, no corpse to become a martyr's relic. You vanished beneath the surface and the river closed over you as if you'd never existed. But here's what most people miss about Roman drowning. It wasn't used frequently in Rome itself because the Tiber was too important, too symbolic to regularly pollute with criminal bodies. Instead, this method flourished in provincial cities where local rivers could absorb the contamination without threatening the empire's spiritual center. And then the 11th method forces us to confront Rome's capacity for creative cruelty. Crucifixion while coated in honey and exposed to insects. This variation appears in sources describing executions in Rome's eastern provinces, territories where the empire absorbed and adapted local practices. You're crucified using the standard method, but before the cross is raised, your entire body is painted with honey, sometimes mixed with milk to make it stickier. Then you're positioned near a marsh or a known insect breeding ground. Flies arrive first within minutes, drawn by the sweetness. They land on your eyes, your lips, your genitals. You can't brush them away because your hands are nailed. Then come the wasps, the hornets, stinging insects attracted by the sugar. Each sting is a new point of fire on your already suffering body. But the real horror builds over hours. The flies lay eggs in your wounds. Maggots begin their work while you still live. You can feel them, moving beneath your skin, an itching, crawling sensation that drives condemned prisoners into screaming madness long before asphyxiation can claim them. This method was used rarely because it required specific conditions, but its existence reveals how far Roman administrators would go to engineer suffering that transcended mere death. This was death as invasion, your body transformed into an ecosystem of decay while you remained conscious enough to experience it. Now we arrive at the 12th method, and this one might seem anticlimactic after what's come before. Starvation. Simple, clean, requiring no executioner, no tools, no spectacle. You're locked in a cell and denied food. Water comes usually enough to keep you alive but deteriorating. The body consumes itself in stages. First, the fat reserves, then the muscle. Your mind begins to break as hunger becomes the only thought you can hold. Days blur together. Weakness progresses until you can't stand, can't lift your arms, can't do anything but lie on the stone floor and wait for the body's final systems to fail. Rome used this method for political prisoners whose deaths needed to appear natural, whose executions would cause diplomatic complications if performed publicly. Starvation provided plausible deniability. They simply stopped eating, officials could claim. We offered food, they refused. Who can argue with that narrative when the prisoner is long dead and no wounds mark their body? But that's when you realize the genius of this method's cruelty. Unlike the spectacular deaths, unlike crucifixion's public theater or the arena's roaring crowds, starvation is intimate. You die alone, you die slowly, and you die knowing the world outside continues, that people are eating, that meals are being prepared and consumed mere walls away from your cell while you waste. The psychological dimension of that separation, of being excluded from humanity's most basic shared ritual, equals any physical torture. So now you understand the 12 methods, but here's the revelation that should chill you. These weren't 12 separate practices. They were a system, a language of state power that communicated precise messages through the mode of death selected. Roman law and custom created clear categories. Citizens received beheading, or in extreme cases, being sewn in a sack for parricide. Non-citizens could be crucified, thrown to beasts, or impaled. Slaves faced the same as non-citizens, plus potential burning alive. Military personnel had their own code, their own executions like the Fustuarium. And certain crimes, regardless of status, triggered specific deaths. Parricide meant the sack. Arson meant burning. Treason meant crucifixion. Desertion meant beating by your unit or impalement. Think about what this system accomplished. It didn't just punish criminals, it reinforced the empire's entire social hierarchy every time someone died. Your method of execution announced to everyone watching what category of person you were, what crime you'd committed, and what relationship you'd held to Roman power. Death itself became a text that could be read, interpreted, learned from. The crowd at a crucifixion saw not just a suffering body, but a statement about citizenship, about belonging, about the boundaries of acceptable behavior. And the most terrifying part, isn't the pain these methods inflicted, it's the rationality. The Romans weren't sadists in the way we use that word. They didn't torture for pleasure. They engineered suffering for effect, for communication, for the maintenance of an empire that spanned 3 continents and required every subject to understand their place in a vast hierarchy they'd never chosen to join. The executions were textbooks, lessons written in flesh and blood and bone that no one who witnessed them would forget. The aftermath of these practices echoed for centuries. When Christianity became Rome's official religion in the 4th century of the Common Era, under Emperor Constantine, many of these methods were officially banned. Crucifixion ended. The arena executions stopped. The more elaborate tortures were declared un-Christian, incompatible with mercy and redemption. But here's what actually happened. The methods changed, the calculation remained. Medieval Europe would develop its own taxonomies of execution, burning for heretics, hanging, drawing, and quartering for traitors, breaking on the wheel for murderers. Different tools, same logic. Death as message, death as theater. Death as the state's ultimate assertion that it alone decides who lives, how they live, and how that life will end. The pattern Rome established, execution as systematic communication rather than simple violence, became the template every subsequent empire would follow. Because Rome understood something that transcends any particular culture or era. Control a population's deaths, and you control their lives. Make death public, and you make obedience private. Turn execution into spectacle, and you turn every citizen into both audience and potential actor, wondering always which role they'll play when the crowd gathers next. So if this journey through Rome's machinery of death has shown you something about power you can't unsee, hit like and subscribe because the next story gets even darker. Drop a comment telling me which ancient civilization's justice system you want explored next. Medieval Islamic courts, the Aztec Empire's ritual sacrifices, the Byzantine Empire's refinements of Rome's methods. I'll be reading every response. And remember, understanding history's horrors isn't about dwelling in darkness. It's about recognizing the patterns that repeat, the logic that transcends time, the mechanisms of control that shift shape but never quite disappear. Because these methods, these 12 ways Rome chose to end lives, they weren't aberrations. They were the foundation stones of imperial administration, and their echoes still whisper in modern systems of punishment, still shape how states think about justice, deterrence, and the theater of consequence. And that is what really happened.